Great. Okay, well, let's get started. So my name's Bridget, and I'm working for Plan International on our resilience and climate change adaptation programming. And welcome to our session, Pathways to Resilience, where we're going to talk about integrating resilience and climate adaptation, bridging humanitarian and development agendas. So, go to the next screen. Having a few issues with the tech. I think we might just have to do it from this angle. So in the session today, I'd like to have sort of very quick overview, introductions and interpretations of resilience. And we'll talk a little bit about how it bridges humanitarian and development agendas. Then I'd like to share with you Plan International's approach to operationalizing resilience. And then we shall have time for a discussion to talk about your perspectives and experiences on strengthening resilience, focusing on opportunities, challenges, and next steps. So before we start, to keep it simple, we won't go to Mentimeter, but I'd just like you to think about your work and think about how relevant you think resilience is to your work. And I'd like you to type in the chat on a scale of 1 to 5. And 1 being you don't think resilience is very relevant to your work, and 5 would be you think it's completely highly relevant to everything that you do. So if you can type in the chat, your answers. Oh, I can't see the chat with the way it's set up now.
Hi, Bridget, could you share the link to the Mentimeter again?
Yeah, so I was going to say, because of the tech issues we had in the last session, I think it's easier if we just type in the chat. And so the question is, how relevant do you think resilience is to your work? And to type in the chat on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 if you think it's not really relevant to your work in your organization, and 5 if you think it's relevant to everything you're doing across all of your works and programs. Okay, so we've got a couple 5s already. 5, okay. And don't feel influenced if you feel that it's something that isn't so relevant, but great to see that. Okay, and another 5. So good that we're seeing across the group strong feelings that it is relevant across your work. And then my next question is, what words do you associate with strengthening resilience? And again, can we type answers in the chat? And yeah, okay, so Tara's put systems, participatory, livelihoods. Yes, absolutely, particularly on the systems angle. Sustainability, yeah, thank you, Dora. Any other thoughts in terms of words we associate with strengthening resilience? Capacity, yeah, we'll talk more about that in a moment. Adaptability, yes, definitely. Okay, so and sustainability again. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you for those thoughts. So yes, they are all definitely integral to strengthening resilience. As I'm sure we're all aware, resilience has come from a very sort of multidisciplinary history. And what we're talking about today is disaster resilience, which builds on disaster risk reduction. But it's building on that to promote a holistic view of risk. So better understanding the interplay of risks and the need to anticipate unidentified risks. And you can see there in the diagram how risks are building on each other in our current context, addressing COVID-19. We've got an incoming recession and we've got climate change exacerbating risks on top of that. And that leads on to the fact that resilience as a concept has really grown in prominence in recent years. And so we're seeing climate change exacerbating and creating new risks, and humanitarian crises continuing to increase, and the duration of them also continuing to increase. So really putting resilience as an approach to try and go beyond preparedness responses and build back better, but take a holistic view of risk and strengthen capacities to address the humanitarian crises that we are seeing continuing to be exacerbated. So in terms of what we actually mean by resilience, there are a wide range of interpretations, but generally resilience is recognized as an approach to manage identified and unknown shocks and stresses to support sustainable development. And what do we mean by shocks and stresses? So shocks, we're talking about events that suddenly break the functioning of a system. So for example, extreme weather, such as typhoons or floods, and also shocks such as conflict. And then stresses, we're talking about steady but constant deterioration of a system. So that could be unrestrained urbanization, desertification, or for example, prolonged conflict, or again, our meteorological hazards such as recurrent drought. So we are trying to work with a resilient approach to ensure that these shocks and stresses do not have an enduring negative impact on people, so that we can make sure that our development gains are then protected in times of crisis. And we can sum that up by trying to build capacity across 4 main areas: anticipatory, absorptive, adaptive, and transformative in the face of shocks and stressors. So in terms of these capacities, just very quickly, what we're talking about there in terms of anticipatory capacity is the ability to anticipate and reduce the impacts and shocks and stresses through preparedness. So this comes before a crisis. It's proactive action before a foreseen event to reduce exposure or minimize vulnerability, and it's to specific hazards. We then have an absorptive capacity under our resilience agenda to absorb and cope with the impacts of shocks and stresses. So this happens during and after crises. We have adaptive capacity, and this is really important in terms of adapting to multiple long-term and future risks that we're seeing exacerbated by climate change. And it's about learning and adjusting our responses to changes in external conditions. So plan decisions to achieve a desired state when the conditions have changed. And so we're reducing vulnerability to future events. And then we also have a transformative capacity. So these are the fundamental changes to reduce the underlying causes of risk and vulnerabilities. So this is the bigger picture in terms of really trying to change structures and systems, engaging in long-term change processes that alter norms, values, beliefs, power structures, and systems to then support our resilient agenda. So supporting justice, equality, and risk-informed sustainable development that lots of you mentioned in the chat when we're talking about what comes to mind when we say strengthening resilience. And you can see there from the example that already cuts across both development agendas and humanitarian agendas, and it's relevant to the nexus of these 2 agendas as well. So resilience is really bringing together knowledge and practice from across disciplines. So we've talked about disaster risk reduction. It's also bringing knowledge from climate change adaptation, environmental management and restoration, poverty reduction, and conflict resolution. And so it's widely recognized as a useful concept to actually help break down sectoral silos and reduce the multiplicity of risks, both now and into the future. However, we have found that actually translating this concept of resilience into practice remains a challenge. And we'll come back to this in our discussion to hear your perspectives in terms of actually operationalizing resilience. So before we do that, I just wanted to share with you Plan International's approach to operationalizing resilience. And like I said, there's different interpretations of resilience, and with Plan being a child rights focused organization, our definition of resilience is the capacity of children, adolescents, youth, caregivers, communities, and institutions to overcome shocks and stresses that undermine the full and equal enjoyment of human rights. So we have this highlighted in Plan's global strategy, and we also have it recognized as our key strategy to respond to the climate crisis. We've then developed a framework called Pathways to Resilience to operationalize this agenda and to try and integrate resilience across our programming. So we have 6 priority areas of work, and we want to make sure that they are resilient to shocks and stresses, as well as looking for opportunities to integrate standalone approaches to strengthen resilience. So to quickly show you our theory of change, you can see at the top, we have our intended impact. So that is our definition of resilience. I'm sorry that I'm not on the full screen. It was the tech doesn't seem to be letting it stay up. But you can see at the top there, hopefully, that we've got our impact statement. And then if we go down to these coloured arrows, these are our pathways to reach our resilience agenda. And we've identified 5 different thematic areas to integrate resilience across our programming. So you can see with the yellow arrow there, we've got improved risk knowledge. We're also working to ensure continuous access to basic services on the pink arrow. We want to promote healthy environments through our programming, ensure it's green and environmentally sound. And then on the purple arrow there, you can see approaches to ensure that we've got equitable social and economic safety nets and resources as part of our resilience agenda. And then bringing that together as well, we want to make sure we have accountable policy and legal frameworks. So there are pathways to initially build resilience, to anticipate, absorb, adapt, and transform to shocks and stressors. And then they contribute to the longer term development agenda for our long-term outcomes to achieve that, our resilient agenda and our impact statement. So going on to the next slide, they are our sort of 5 pathways to resilience. I didn't mean to do that, and I was just trying to get back onto the share screen, sorry, and to show you what these compose of. So our risk knowledge is built up by what we call building blocks. So different resources, information sources, tools to integrate risk knowledge across programming. So this is covering climate, environment, and DRR education, life skills, and health and safety practices. The next thematic or pathway for building resilience is planning and basic services. So there we're talking about early warning information, weather information, continuity plans, contingency plans, emergency services and information, and action planning. The next thematic is healthy environment. So looking at how we ensure our programming is environmentally sound. And there we've got natural resource management, waste management, and also integrating it into the programming itself. So our ecosystem-based DRR, ecosystem-based CCA approaches. The 4th thematic is social and economic safety nets and resources. So there we're talking about credit and financial services, savings, diversified and sustainable livelihoods, social protection and social capital, integrating that across our programming. And then the 5th thematic is policy frameworks. So making sure that we have resilience integrated across risk reduction policy and guidelines, environmental protection law, risk-informed sectoral plans, climate policy, and that we've got inclusion and participation as a central focus throughout all of these agendas. So that's our pathways to resilience. In terms of actually operationalizing this, we have a framework approach. We're developing micro courses and videos and supporting materials for a country office that would want to look at strengthening resilience across their programming or across their strategic direction. They can use this to choose which activities and actions and thematics they feel is relevant to their work and their objectives, and then pick out the relevant tools to then contextualize the approach to strengthen resilience for their specific objective and strategy. And then we're also working, of course, to align our programming with our policy work So aligning our resilience and climate agendas there with the climate justice agenda, taking very much the influencing angle in terms of driving forward our resilience strategy and approach. We're also then making sure that all of our resilience and climate work is aligned to our internal environmental policy, and we have an environmental assessment tool to make sure that the work is green and environmentally sound. So in practice, where are we today? So we're at the beginning of operationalizing the pathways to resilience. We're currently reviewing our global strategy. So we're working to integrate resilience and climate across our, like I said, our 6 priority areas. We're also then looking at the sort of programmatic level, so how we can integrate into program manuals and implementation guidance. So for example, our food security and livelihoods programming have developed a new response guidance document where we're looking at integrating those activities from the pathways to resilience into their existing approaches. And then another example there is the education and emergencies programming are part of the update of a program manual. And we're there looking at how we can strengthen resilience of education systems to shocks and stressors. And at the same time, a dual agenda of looking at how we can integrate standalone resilience approaches and knowledge and awareness into curriculum. So I've put one example there of a possible resource to do that, which are our children's climate cards, which engage children on the climate and resilient agenda and the actions that they would like to see going forward, that could be piloted in a education in emergencies context. And the last point I've put there is partnerships and collaboration, which we see as crucial to the resilience agenda being so multidisciplinary. We really see that as the way forward. And that's another reason why I put the children's climate cards there, as they were developed as a collaborative agenda to advance resilience across the Children in a Changing Climate Coalition, so Plan International, UNICEF, Save the Children, World Vision, and Child Fund, as well as the IFRC, the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre, the Met Office, and the British Red Cross as a collaborative approach. So we really see that as another strategic way of taking resilience forward. And then a quick few other examples before we have, I think, 10 minutes for the discussion. In terms of programming going forward, we have a global resilience and climate network where we are keen to share our pathways to resilience, to look at opportunities to pilot where country offices are interested to take this forward, and looking at different contexts for where there is scope to strengthen resilience across programming. We want to scope knowledge management and learning from past initiatives. So we've got examples in Asia Pacific of child-centered climate change adaptation. We want to promote ongoing initiatives. So one example there, for example, is in South Sudan. Plan South Sudan have a resilience initiative at the moment on community gardening, but specifically this is led by new mothers. So there is a holistic approach to provide nutritious food for young children. There's a social cohesion element in terms of bringing together new mothers, and there is a sort of knowledge management learning in terms of new mothers being trained on new skills and sharing that approach with others in their community. So there's a peer-to-peer learning element built in. And the locally owned agenda that some of you mentioned in the chat at the beginning is very much prominent throughout this approach. I've also put on another example there in terms of Uganda, where we're looking at integrating resilience and climate adaptation into an existing sexual reproductive health and rights programming, so making sure that's resilient to shocks and stresses. We're also looking at anticipatory action and forecast-based financing. So we've got a consultancy at the moment looking at what's currently happening in plan and how we can move that forward as a aspect of our holistic resilience agenda, and similarly aligning programming to existing approaches. So for example, the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance and their flood risk management tool, and how we can integrate that into our holistic resilience pathways approach. So now I would like to do, and I think we have a few minutes left for a quick discussion, is talk about opportunities and challenges and next steps. So Michael has shared in the chat the link to the Miro board. And if you click on that link, and I will also share my screen, you'll be taken to an interactive board where we can discuss opportunities and challenges. We don't have much time, and we're a small group, so feel free to unmute yourself if there's anything you would like to share in terms of opportunities and challenges to strengthen resilience. And you can think about your own work, your organizational approach, or more broadly across the sector. And you can see we've got some comments already on there from the last group. So I will stop there and hand over to everybody else to see if there's any thoughts in terms of opportunities and challenges to strengthen resilience. If you would like to type yourself, you click on the blue square, double click on it to get a cursor, and then you can type your answers. But also feel free to unmute and I can type the answers on as you speak. Any thoughts on the question there, opportunities and challenges to strengthen resilience? Yeah, brilliant. So we've got a comment there. Is it Abdi? Using youth as voluntary work with us so that they develop their skills. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we can add that to the board. And what skills would you be talking about there? The specific, and we make use of their skills, yes. And is that with regards, are you thinking there in terms of a specific program that you have at the moment, or is this something that you'd like to see happening in the future?
You're asking me and you want me to answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Actually, we are implementing this program. We have some volunteers. We offer them the chance to work with us in different sectors, depending on their abilities, depending on their qualifications, so that they develop their skills. And if we see them like they're doing well, we might also give them a job after like maybe 3 months or 4 months if they're doing well. So we give them like a job later on. So that in this way they develop their skills, and also we make use of their efforts. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. And how could you explain a little bit further in terms of how that contributes to resilience to shocks and stresses?
This will, kind of, develop the skills of the youth in the community. Those who cannot find jobs, it's not easy to find jobs in Yemen, especially at this prolonged conflict. So that we develop their skills, and we contribute to the resilience of the community with these youth who don't have jobs, but they have a chance to find a place, a platform where they can develop themselves, so that they're ready to face the life and find jobs in other places after they finish their voluntary work or program.
Yeah, brilliant.
That's for them.
Thank you so much. And you said this is a program in Yemen, is that correct?
Actually, it's not in Yemen. I'm talking about my organization. That's what we do.
Okay.
It's called Life Makers Meeting Place Organization. That's what we currently do.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, in terms of developing opportunities and job security to help contribute to the broader resilience agenda, to be able to adapt and anticipate shocks and stresses. Any other thoughts from anybody else? And Michael has said, any ideas on the use of technologies? you want to build on that, Michael? Is that a question or a?
Yeah, I brought that up because I'm always fascinated with some of these programs where they use satellite imagery to look at how the ecosystem is changing, how water streams and empowering the communities to understand what are the changes happening and where are perhaps mitigation projects that can take place by actually having, evidence-based imagery that shows what's happening in their ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one link to that is the use of forecasting as well, and monitoring and the forecast-based financing agenda, so that we are really using technology to make sure that we can be better prepared and have our operating procedures in place, so that when we do experience a shock or stressor, we are ready to take action. But yeah, that's a nice example as well, in terms of really using and applying the technology we have available to us to advance the resilience agenda. Does anybody else have any examples from their organizations to add to what Michael has just said? And you can see across the bottom of the screen, I've put some examples of shocks and stressors. So if you're thinking about your programming and the areas you work on, think about what happens in these contexts if there is a shock or a stressor. So if you experience extreme weather and climate events, or if there's a geophysical event, such as an earthquake, or if there's a disease outbreak, like we're experiencing currently with COVID-19, or if there's conflict, or if you're in a context of rapid urbanization, how is your program adapted or anticipatory to these shocks and stressors? Or perhaps is it not at the moment? And do you see opportunities to strengthen resilience to these shocks and stressors?
Hello, everyone. This is Mei Ling from Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation in Germany. And maybe I can share a little that our experience. We are international humanitarian organization and also doing relief for like earthquake or floods. And recently this year for lots of COVID-19 response. And what we think very important is when we arrive a new disaster area, we try to involve local people to do the relief work, because they can learn from our experience that how can they take response to if something happened locally. And this strategy actually worked very well during the COVID-19 time, because, for example, in Philippines, during the Typhoon Haiyan time, that we arrived with very little numbers of staffs. But finally, we are able to encourage local people to join us, because only by few people we cannot really solve lots of disaster problems after the disaster happened. But for example, the first moment we encourage with the cash for work, it's kind of like paying them. And as long as they come to help to clean their street or home, that we take names and we give them cash right away. And it also help like to rebuild the livelihood and the local economy. And during those recovering time, we try to teach them that what else they can do. For example, we teach them that we can take care of the environment